Welcome back to the CBMW podcast, your weekly download of cutting-edge complementarian commentary and one-stop shop for egalitarians opposition research. I am Jonathan Swan, executive editor of Icon, a journal for biblical anthropology, and I'm joined alongside by Colin Smothers, the executive director of CBMW, and Denny Burke, president of CBMW. Thanks for joining the show again, guys.
Great to be here.
Absolutely.
Well, hey, we want to turn our attention today to a story that's recently garnered national attention, provoked numerous national conversations, and that is this grievous story of the fatal, unprovoked stabbing of the young Ukrainian girl, Iryna Zarutska, and while she was on a public railway in Charlotte, North Carolina. Important to the story is the fact that her assailant was a man with an extensive criminal record, I think 14 arrests, a history of violence, threatening behavior, armed robbery, and so on. And of course, there are many angles that commentators have taken to the story, many of which are legitimate and worthy of discussion. But being a ministry for biblical manhood and womanhood, we'd like to discuss how this event and other recent events reflect the state of our society and specifically the state of manhood today. So, guys, it's been said that hard times create strong men create good times create weak men create hard times. Reflecting on that and given what we know about this violence that's taken place in Charlotte, what lessons can we draw from it about the state of manhood in America today?
This is a story that has been flashing across my social media news feed for the past few days now. And, I can't help but think of my own wife, my own sisters-in-law, my own daughters in that position, just sort of minding her own business on, the railway home from a hard day's work. And literally, it seems like nothing provoking this senseless violence, which ends tragically in her untimely death. And, I think rightly we're seeing outrage across the country because this is an incident that not only should not have happened, but seems, from all accounts, was completely preventable, given all the times that this individual had run-ins with the law. And so one of the things I tweeted in the aftermath of just kind of processing the horrific nature of this violence and how quick it was, how senseless it was, I said, this is a man who should have been confronted and subdued by stronger men speaking morally there and physically, long before and leading up to this incident. Instead, the criminal's encounter with weak men allowed this to happen. And so, different video angles proliferated on the internet of this incident. We're not sure, exactly how the bystanders could have or should have intervened. It does seem like there wasn't necessarily a quickness involved here, but the point is, where was this individual's father? Where was this individual's brothers? Where was this individual's community leaders? I mean, it seems like from given reports that I've read, his mother tried to intervene and get some help for him on his behalf. And, I think the mom tried and it didn't work, whether the justice system failed in that situation or social workers, whatever it is. But the question is, where are the men in this guy's life? Where are the men in this woman's life to be able to protect and really provide leadership here around and before this incident? And again, I just can't help but think this is an incident that points to the fact that we are a nation, as Lewis says, of men full of we're a nation full of men without chests, and that's the line I keep coming back to.
I'll be honest. I had seen this story over the weekend and earlier in the week, and I knew there was video attached to it. I didn't want to watch it and had kind of avoided it until last night. There was, I think, more of the video came out yesterday, and I ended up just watching everything I could find, and it's horrific. It's horrible. I mean, it's not a normal thing that you would see somebody murdered in cold blood and then it would be caught on camera like that. And, I think there's a visceral reaction that people have to something like this. And I think a part of the visceral reaction can be good and right. I think another part of it we need to be wary of. The part of it that's good and right is that I think for especially men looking at this, there's something deep within us that says something is wrong. Men failed here. Like there was a duty and an obligation to protect. And at somewhere, at some level, it didn't happen. And that goes into what Colin was just talking about with whatever led this man to this point that he would perpetrate such an ugly crime. But then also the systems that led to a guy who'd been arrested numerous times, who'd been in jail, to be released. Why did that happen? I don't know the answer to all those questions yet, but there's something within our guts telling us something is deeply wrong and evil, and that men owed better to a young woman who was just getting onto a train and who was peacefully just riding along and out of nowhere was savagely attacked. I think the visceral reaction to that fundamental evil is right in the sense that we wish that somebody could have stepped in and helped her in the moment, before the moment, even after the moment. I think that that horror that we all feel, that we wish we could have done something and we wish that someone had done something. I think that that's right. I think that we have to settle. I think what happens now is we sort out, well, what happened to this? How did this happen? I think there are already signs of failures in a criminal justice system that this guy was back out on the street. I certainly think that there are, really troubling signs from leaders and politicians. When the mayor of Charlotte, North Carolina came out and made the statement that she did that expressed sympathy for the perpetrator rather than the victim. Now, I know that earlier she had expressed sympathy for the victim, but she came back later and made these sympathetic remarks for the perpetrator of this horrific crime, as if we had failed him, which I think that's just morally obtuse. I think there is no way that you look at what happened there and I don't feel what we should feel is outrage at the evil that he perpetrated. Whatever led him to that is it should be outrage at that, and then sympathy for the victim. And so, but what I think, what the mayor said, what I think it signals is a real problem in our culture with regard to crime and punishment and attitudes about these things. Dr. Moeller Albert Moeller wrote a really insightful column this morning for World Opinions. I think he's exactly right in there. He just talked about the moral sensibilities of conservatives versus liberals, and that liberals tend to see horrific events like that and attribute it to systemic causes and to root causes that need to be fixed. Whereas conservatives tend to view things as, no, there are people have agency and moral responsibility for their actions. Now, we know that there's mental health issues likely involved here. I think that that's pretty clear, but I still think we have to look at this as a horrific evil. And he never should have been on that train. So all of these issues are implicated by this, but I do think looking at this, there's something in our guts that makes us feel like men failed her. Somewhere we've failed her, and we need to do better.
Yeah, Colin, you had mentioned when you spoke about those who should have confronted the man before it happened, right? God has instituted a fundamental institution called the family, right? And a mother and a father lovingly raising their sons through discipline and instruction is one of those structures that should lean in. Of course, in God's economy, that family institution is supported by the church, by pastors who are teaching the doctrines of sin, the doctrines of creation, and also the doctrines of grace. But another level of responsibility here is the state. And on a political level, I think what we've seen is that men have abdicated their responsibility to protect by bowing to false gods and ideologies that actually prevent us from protecting life and liberty and property. And so Dr. Moeller had mentioned this in the article, Denny, that you just referenced, that there's a different anthropology at work in these ideas. There's a denial of original sin. Man is seen as essentially good. Society and societal structures are the problem. And if we could just get those right, then we'll have an obedient, or I guess a righteous person. There is a different sense of justice, right? There's doctrines of restorative justice that treat criminals, like the mayor did to some extent, as victims, and seeks to reform them rather than punish them, keep them on the streets. There's this, the ideologies of social justice that views justice as a class, race issue. Both of these, deny the biblical kinds of justice, such as retributive justice, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and even principles of deterrence. And so I think among other factors, what we're seeing here is that the failure of our justice system is the failure of men fulfilling their role through political means to protect innocent life. And so, guys, now how can a recovery then of biblical manhood through leadership, provision, protection be a benefit of society? So where do we go from here?
Yeah, I think the justice system is just downstream and a product of our culture. One of the incidents that was in the background, I think rightly, when this incident happened was one that happened months ago with Daniel Penny. And, there was a situation on a public transit, and here was a guy who intervened against another man, one man intervening against another, threatening man who was a real danger to those on the transportation there. And the backlash against the one who felt it, Daniel Penny, a duty to be able to protect and to provide leadership in that situation. I think it's the reaction to that situation that sort of creates the culture and the milieu where we look into this and we wish that there was somebody who would have acted, or someone who maybe could have been preventing or preventative here. And we don't see that kind of manhood, that leadership, that protection stepping in. And we ask the reason why. Why is it that when in a moment of tragedy, in a moment of calamity, in a moment of horrific violence, why do we sort of in our natures, this kind of state of nature situation, look to the men and ask, where did the men fail? That's good and right. That is a right question. Where were the men in this individual's life to be able to come and protect and to, again, provide leadership here? And the question, it kind of begs what has been denied by progressive thought for the last decades. And that is, there is a fundamental difference between men and women. Men, by their very natures and designs, are called and designed by God to lead, provide, and protect. In the last few decades, we have seen a full court press against that idea, denying men this leadership calling, this protective calling to be able to look out for those who are placed under leadership, who are more vulnerable in their natures. And I think what we're seeing is a result of that. And, I mentioned C.S. Lewis's abolition of man, and he has this famous phrase, we're creating men without chests. And I would just quote from there. He says, "We make men without chests and expect of them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst. We castrate and bid the geldings to be fruitful." In other words, we're not doing, culturally speaking, we're not laying the groundwork of what it looks like to have a chest, to have a heart toward leadership, toward provision, toward protection. And then when something like this happens, we ask, where are the good men? Where are the virtuous ones who would oppose this kind of thing? And we don't connect the dots. So that's what I want to see this national conversation moving forward to, is how do we create not only just systems of justice, but a culture where this kind of thing is unthinkable, because there are good men ready to address the issue.
That Daniel Penny example is so illustrative because, immediately in the aftermath of that, it seemed obvious that he was trying to protect people. He was trying to help people, but it immediately got racialized. Mm-hmm. And because it got racialized, he was arrested and charged with a crime. And of course, he eventually was acquitted, but he had to go through this long torturous ordeal because it got racialized early, and it was unjust. I think in this situation, one caution here that I would add that I mentioned earlier, and that is racializing this from the other direction. I do see a lot of, especially some anonymous accounts, sometimes named accounts online on social media postings, just turning this into an outright racist narrative that, Black people are inferior in their morals. And in other words, it's an unbiblical anthropology that one particular race is more fallen than the other. That's basically what they're arguing out there, which is, if that's not racist, I don't know what is. And that's racializing something from the other direction. I think that's equally wrong. I think that's equally toxic. When really we need to have a biblical anthropology, and we need to understand that people have agency, and it's not connected necessarily to the color of their skin. Okay, that's a morally indifferent characteristic, but people are responsible for the choices that they make. So I get concerned about this racialization from both sides, and I think as Christians we want to speak against it, no matter which side it's coming from.
Well, brothers, thank you for joining me today. Until next time, visit cbmw.org to find more biblical resources on the family, gender, and sexuality.